He was always driven by a distorted idea of what really mattered. The people who passed through his life were no more than pieces on a board, each with a role to play, but none with the power to change him deeply. He had built walls around himself, believing that his independence made him stronger. Each connection, each bond, was just a transaction, a game in which he controlled the rules. That was until you entered his life. You were not like the others. From the beginning, he felt something different in you, an energy perhaps that disarmed him, but which he couldn't understand. He searched for justifications for the vulnerability that began to emerge, but his mind was so accustomed to coldness and distance that he couldn't see the truth that was already there. He had never been truly seen by anyone until then. Not that other people didn't care, but they only saw what he showed. They saw the facade, the story he told himself and others. But you were different. While he played his game, you looked beyond the layers he had carefully built over the years. You weren't impressed by what was on the surface. You cared about what was underneath, what he tried to hide even from himself. Something in you perceived the unspoken pain, the kept secrets, and the loneliness he tried to disguise with laughter and stories of success. You saw him as he really was, and that was something he didn't know how to deal with. He tried in vain to keep his distance. He tried to hide behind a mask he believed to be impermeable, but your presence was like a light that illuminated the cracks in his soul. As the days went by, he realized the discomfort it caused him, the feeling of being seen so deeply, with no escape. It was as if you had the power to strip him bare in a way that no one ever had before. He began to notice how used he was to hiding his true emotions. The loneliness he had nurtured for so long began to be exposed to the light of his perception. You knew his weaknesses and insecurities, but somehow you never used them against him. On the contrary, your presence seemed to accept him in a way that no one else ever had, as if he were enough, just as he was. He didn't know how to handle that. There was something in his soul that yearned for this kind of connection, but his rational mind always dodged it, protecting itself from the depths he feared to touch. Yet with you, it was different. He felt an irresistible attraction to the authenticity you represented. What he didn't know was that you had already noticed this before. You knew from the beginning that he was more than he appeared to be. You weren't impressed by the walls he put up, by the defense mechanisms he used. Your perception went beyond what he showed to the world. You saw him in his entirety, with all his contradictions, with his weaknesses, but also with all his inner strength, the one he tried to hide. And that was what made him special to you. However, what he didn't understand at that time was how much the truth you saw in him scared him. The truth is, he wasn't ready to be truly seen. He thought he knew what he wanted, but in reality, he was lost, hiding even from himself. The recognition of his essence by you generated a mix of gratitude and fear in him. He wasn't ready to be vulnerable, wasn't ready to allow himself to be loved in such a pure and unconditional way, and maybe that's why he withdrew. If you've experienced something similar, comment, "I needed to hear this." Over time, he began to notice that you were different from anyone who had come into his life. It wasn't just about attraction or a fleeting connection. You were, in a way he couldn't explain, the only person who truly saw him. Not what he wanted to show, not what he tried to make appear, but who he really was in his deepest essence. And it was only then that he started to understand the true meaning of being loved. He began to realize that no one had ever looked at him the way you did. It was too late, of course. He knew that. He had already distanced himself from you. Pride and defense had already taken the place of something more real, but the recognition of his own vulnerability finally brought with it an indescribable pain, because he knew you had already gone. You, who had seen him in such a pure way, were no longer there to help him realize the truth he was just beginning to understand. What remained now were the shadows of his own soul, reflected in a deep loneliness he had never experienced before. He began to wonder, and maybe you have also wondered, how can someone be so close to you and at the same time so distant? The answer, perhaps, is that he never really knew what it meant to be truly seen. He didn't know how to surrender, how to let himself be seen without fear. He thought it meant losing control, losing identity, losing his essence. What he didn't know, and now realized too late, was that being seen by someone is actually the greatest form of freedom. You never tried to change who he was. You just saw him with all that he was and accepted him. Now, with the distance he imposed between you, he finally understands the gravity of his failure. He realizes the unique value you had, a singularity he didn't recognize while he was still by your side. The emptiness he feels now is an echo of what he let slip away. He tried to cover this emptiness with distractions, with new relationships, but nothing seemed to fill what he had lost, because what he lost was not just you. He lost the opportunity to see himself deeply and truly as you saw him. This is the moment he sees himself in his entirety. He sees his flaws, his mistakes, but he also sees the chance to rediscover something he never imagined possible, true connection. And that's when he understands the depth of your presence in his life. You were not just a part of his story. You were, in a way he could never explain, the only person who saw him completely, with all his brightness and shadows. And he realizes too late that the only person who really knew him was you. Does this make sense to you? Write yes down here. Now he finds himself on the verge of a transformation. He already knows what it's like to lose something that can't be recovered, and more than that, he begins to realize that true change doesn't come from the outside. He can't go back, but he can learn to be more authentic with himself, to start seeing himself as you saw him, in his entirety. But will that be enough? The pain of loss still echoes in his heart, and the only answer he has now is to look inward. Who will he be from this moment on? The truth is that he doesn't know yet. Maybe he's just beginning to understand, but the path to comprehension is long and painful. What he can no longer ignore is that the only person who really saw him was you, and now perhaps he has to learn to see himself with the same clarity that you once brought to his life. The truth always comes at a price, and now he pays the price for not recognizing the one truth that truly mattered while it was still by his side. The pain he feels now is something he had never experienced before. It is not a physical pain, nor a loss that can easily be filled with anything. It is a deep, silent pain that penetrates his soul and leaves him speechless. Until that moment, he didn't know that the emptiness he feels is not just the lack of you, but the lack of himself. He realizes that he tried for a long time to hide behind a version of himself that was not real. He was so caught up in his own lies, in his own illusions, that he never allowed anyone, not even himself, to see who he really was. Now, looking back, he notices the little things you did that touched him in ways he did not understand. The way you spoke to him, how you touched him, how unknowingly you drew his true self in front of him, a painting that he, blindly, refused to admire. And in that recognition, a question begins to haunt his mind. Why do I see this only now? Why only now, after so much time, can I perceive what you always were? He knows the answer. He is afraid to face the answer. Because in looking at you, in recognizing the depth of what you represented, he needs to face the shadows of his own life, the flaws he chose to ignore until it was no longer possible, the great truth that he so diligently tried to avoid. And he begins to understand that by not allowing himself to be seen by you, he trapped himself in a life that was never truly his. He hid behind a mask that for a time protected him from pain but also isolated him from any chance of real connection. What he didn't know and now finally realizes is that his true strength was never in hiding, but in allowing himself to be seen in his entirety. And in looking at that, he sees how you purely saw him as he truly was, not as he wanted to be, but as he indeed was, with all his imperfections, fears, and unfulfilled dreams. You were not afraid to see his bare soul. You were not afraid to face his fragility, and perhaps that was the greatest gift he ever received. He wonders now if it is still possible to reverse things. Can he still find himself in this sea of confusion that his life has become? Is it too late to try to allow himself to be vulnerable, to open up and try to connect for real without fear? But at the same time, he knows that nothing will be the same as before. He lost the opportunity to experience what was most real and most authentic in his life. He now realizes that the only person who truly saw his essence, without judgment and without masks, was you. You who, in your silence, observed him profoundly, and who perhaps, without words, gave him more than he could ever imagine. He begins to realize that the pain he feels is not just from losing you, but from losing himself. He now knows that you were the key to his own transformation. But at this moment he feels lost, not knowing how to take the first step toward this change. What he doesn't yet understand but begins to feel with all his might is that true change will only come when he finally allows himself to be seen again, when he stops hiding and starts to live the truth that he has up until now tried to hide. Have you ever experienced something similar? Comment, I needed to hear this. What he doesn't immediately comprehend, but will become increasingly clearer to him over time, is that his journey is not about reclaiming something that was lost. It's not about bringing you back, but about finally looking at himself in a way he never dared to before, and this process is painful. He thought the pain only came from the loss, but now he understands that the real pain comes from the fear of facing the truth he had ignored for so long, the pain of having kept distant from his own essence, the pain of not allowing himself to be loved the way you loved him. He didn't know until now that the real loss was not being able to reciprocate the depth of the love you offered him. He didn't understand the value of it until the moment he found himself completely alone, with nothing but his own doubts and questions. Now, he begins to perceive life in a different way. He doesn't know what will happen, but the only certainty he has is that something inside him is changing, and maybe over time he will be able to see what was previously invisible to him. But he knows now that this transformation does not depend on anyone else. It does not depend on you, on a second chance, or on anyone else. It depends solely on him. Above all, he needs to learn to see himself, to learn to perceive the value of his own essence, without the lies he told himself for so long. And maybe that is the true lesson he needs to learn. Being seen is the key to freedom. He begins to realize that despite having lost you, he hasn't lost everything. He still carries within him the ability to rediscover himself. But the only way to achieve this transformation will be by allowing himself to be vulnerable, by allowing himself to be seen as you once saw him in his entirety, without the camouflage and fears. He still has the chance to grow, but for that, he needs to look within himself with courage. And it is in this moment that he finally realizes we can only be truly loved when we are seen in our entirety. He can no longer hide. Now, with this clear in his mind, he wonders what he will do from here. He knows that the path ahead will not be easy. He is afraid of what he will find when he looks at himself, but at the same time, he feels that he no longer has a choice. He needs to move forward, because in some way, he knows that what happened between the two of you was more than a simple lost love story. It was the revelation of something much deeper, something he needs to understand if he truly wants to find peace and true connection with himself, and his journey is just beginning. This reflection doesn't end here. If you felt every word, in the next video, I will show you the next step in this journey of self-discovery and transformation. Click here and join me for the next discovery. I'll see you there.